Phantasy Star and Dragon Quest are more similar than you might think. They share similar game mechanics, and that I'm not really a fan of, but they still share them. And their art style is something that I enjoy. It's different, but I think both of them are very fun and colorful games. They also have a few plot points in common, but they are in common with most RPGs. It seems like Sega used Dragon Quest as a template when they were designing Phantasy Star. I'm not saying that this is what happened, but it just feels like Sega took everything from the first Dragon Quest and greatly improved upon it. This is a case where I very clearly like one game more than the other. I don't think either of these are bad games. Both of them have some very good things in them, but they also share some stuff that I don't like and is kind of a staple in early RPGs, like having to grind for levels and also having some kind of annoying menu systems that just seems like they get in the way more than anything else. Both of these games are turn-based RPGs where the player goes on a quest to free a kingdom from an evil character. They have similar battle scenes, plot points, the game mechanics are fairly similar. These two games have quite a bit in common, but Phantasy Star really improves on just the base gameplay that's in Dragon Quest. Phantasy Star is a spacefaring adventure where you're traveling between 3 planets as you gather items that you're going to need in order to beat the game, and you also gather your party of 4 characters. There is also, more character development. The story gets started differently. The story's much better than it is in Dragon Quest, because Dragon Quest is really just a bare bones narrative, and Phantasy Star takes you on a much larger adventure. The character motivations are better explained in Phantasy Star. It seems like most people in the game have a reason for wanting King Lassic out of the way. There's also a lot more science fiction in this, because it is a science fiction game, and Dragon Quest is a simple high fantasy RPG that has some pretty archaic gameplay mechanics. You can tell that it took a lot of inspiration from tabletop RPGs. I don't really like this aspect of the game that much, as it would have been a lot better if some of the rougher edges of this game had been smoothed out. But they probably just didn't think about that, and they were just trying to make the best game that they could at the time. And they most likely were not thinking about some jackass who was going to come in 30 to 40 years after the fact and critique their game. And I can completely understand that. The game has a solo protagonist who goes on a journey to save a princess, gather key items, and eventually defeat a big bad guy. It's a simple story, and it works well for this game at the time that it was released. There really isn't much more to it aside from that, and I can't really fault it for what it is. It does what it does fairly well. There is just more to Phantasy Star, and it feels like Sega took everything from Dragon Quest and improved on it. It's got a really unique setting, an incredible story, and yeah, just to spoil the whole thing, I like it a lot more. Some of the major differences between these two games is Phantasy Star has a much better plot, the graphics are better, and the gameplay's better. It uses a party system, whereas Dragon Quest is just a solo protagonist. There's just kind of the simple things. There's a lot more that I could go into, but that's pretty much the major differences between these two games. The setting, I think, is a lot better in Phantasy Star. It was very different from some of the other RPGs at the time, especially on the home console, where they kind of stuck with a high fantasy setting and maybe, included some sci-fi stuff, but for the most part, just stuck with fantasy. I also really like Phantasy Star's comic book cutscenes. There's just a lot of stuff in this that Phantasy Star does better, and, I'll go ahead and get into that and talk about what I like more about that game. Phantasy Star does just about everything better than the first Dragon Quest. It has better cutscenes, the graphics are better, the story is better, and I really like the setting a lot more. This game is just a better version of what Dragon Quest brought to the table, or at least what they were trying to do at the time. I love the way Phantasy Star's story unfolds. It's, is just really cool. While it uses in-game graphics, which was pretty standard at the time, there are also these comic book cutscenes that get used, and they still look great today. This game really shows off what the Sega Master System could do from a graphics standpoint. Instead of one character, Phantasy Star is a party of 4 characters, and you have to go on a quest to find all of them. I just thought that was really cool when I played it, because it was something you didn't do in a lot of these early RPGs. And Dragon Quest would do something very similar with Dragon Quest II, but that's for another time. I also think Phantasy Star does a better job of making the game feel a lot bigger by having you travel between 3 planets in a solar system. It gives you more variety in the locations that you're going, and there's just more places to explore, or at least it feels like there's more places to explore. It also makes combat more interesting because you have a party of characters instead of just one, so you don't have every class jammed into one character. They're kind of spread out. Even though Phantasy Star doesn't really use a class system, they have characters that are kind of defined as a warrior or, a priest or a wizard, that kind of thing. I also just love the fact that it's science fiction because that adds more to the overall combat. You can use guns, you're going to be fighting robots. The monsters in this are pretty unique as well. That's something that both Phantasy Star and Dragon Quest did well, was just have a unique set of characters to go after. In Phantasy Star, most of the characters have very clear motivations for why they're going on this quest. Some of them want revenge from a loved one who was killed, and others just want to free the solar system from a tyrannical king. There's a lot more character development in Phantasy Star. The story overall is just much more in-depth. There's a lot of things going on in that. I could probably say the same thing about all of the RPGs that I'm going to be comparing to the first Dragon Quest. But yeah, the Phantasy Star just does its story so much better, and it's told in a better way. I really love just everything about it. It's overall just a better game than Dragon Quest. I couldn't really think of anything that Dragon Quest did better than Phantasy Star. The two games are very similarly set up, and I was really just kind of nitpicking when it came to this. If there was one thing that I could probably point to, it would be the inventory system. For lack of anything else to say, Dragon Quest, it does a better job with its healing items in the inventory system. They stack on top of each other. So you don't have 6 individual herbs in there or 6 keys in there that just take up space. They're all just one stack. That doesn't happen in Phantasy Star, and it was a little annoying to kind of navigate that game's inventory when compared to, Dragon Quest. I thought of one other thing when I was writing this stuff down. Dragon Quest does a better job of its dungeons. Well, I don't like having to cast a spell or light a torch. I do like that they use an overhead perspective. While the first-person perspective in Phantasy Star looks really cool, it doesn't really translate to being good gameplay, in my opinion. It just becomes more frustrating, especially when these dungeons get more complex and you don't really have the ability to go get more healing items, and there's no way to replenish your magic points. You just get lost in these dungeons, and then you have to teleport out, go get all of your, healing items and health and everything back, and then try it again, and it just got more frustrating than anything. So there are a few things that I think Dragon Quest does better, but I really wouldn't say that the game overall is better than Phantasy Star. It is a more simplistic game, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better. It's a fun game, but not as much fun as Phantasy Star. Just overall, Phantasy Star is a better game. It does pretty much everything that Dragon Quest does, and it improves on most of it. This game is a combination of everything that I like about Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. The comic book cutscenes really steal the show for me. They work so much better than just using in-game graphics, and I wish other console RPGs had followed Sega's lead here. These cutscenes significantly enhance the story's narrative, complementing the more traditional cutscenes in the game with stuff like this. It just really improves everything in the game. Phantasy Star's battle screens are better than Dragon Quest's just because the enemies look more threatening, and also I love the little attack animations that they do. It really adds a lot to the game. This makes me feel like, the battles are just more impressive. Even if sometimes they're not, it still feels like they're more impressive. Not only does Phantasy Star have a party system, but it sends you out on a quest to go find them all at the very beginning. It's really cool. I love the way that stuff is done. Overall, I think Phantasy Star is just a more refined RPG than the bare-bones story that you have in Dragon Quest. It looks a lot better, story's a lot better, the gameplay's much better, the setting I think is more fun. While high fantasy works really well for a game like this, there's just something about seeing a combination of science fiction with Greek mythology that's just really cool, and I love that Sega went in that direction with this. I would rather be playing Phantasy Star than Dragon Quest. While both of them are a lot of fun to play, and they're still both fairly new to me, I had more fun when I was playing Phantasy Star, and that's the one that I would rather go back to. It's just simply a better game. I guess I could say a bit more about it. The graphics and the gameplay are much better. They share some similarities when it comes to the battle screens, but I just think Phantasy Star does everything better than Dragon Quest. In an effort to not repeat myself any more than I've already done, I'm going to skip over a few things that I've already mentioned way too many times. Everything about Phantasy Star is just done much better. There are a few minor exceptions that don't really have that much of an impact on the game, at least not enough to really change my mind on it. I would rather play Phantasy Star over Dragon Quest. I do like both of these games, and in fact I've liked all three that I've compared to each other. But Dragon Quest and Phantasy Star are both very fun games. They started two very great series. The first Dragon Quest didn't age as well as the first Phantasy Star. It's got a lot of archaic gameplay mechanics that were significantly improved upon in the sequels. Phantasy Star is a more complete game. Gameplay mechanics, story, and characters are just all more developed. And while it still has some issues that other retro RPGs have, I think it mitigates them a bit better than others. I still remember picking up Phantasy Star on the Game Boy Advance back in the 2000s and being pretty disappointed with it. And then after learning how to play it, I enjoy the game a lot more than the first Dragon Quest and the first Final Fantasy. But at this point, it's like choosing your favorite flavor of ice cream. There are really no wrong answers here, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying all three of them. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.